Hey, your viewers and viewers, my name is General Red Strategist and welcome back to Say Being Hunted, episode 544 now, I do believe. So, back with another podcast-style episode. It occurs to me, actually, I probably could have just used the same map as last time, instead of starting a new one. Just because, well, you know, we're not doing a challenge or anything like that, so there's no real actual reason even, for me to start a new map when I could have just used the last one. But, you know, I always do this and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, a device piece off right over there. Two of them, in fact, right off the straight off the bat. Sometimes, you know, maps generate like that, don't they? So yeah, podcast style episode, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're all doing very, very well, and you know, life is treating you fine and all that. Now, I kind of wanted to make just another podcast style episode because I kind of wanted to talk about something again, something I've been watching on YouTube recently, which I think you know might well be something that you guys out there watching this may well find very interesting and all that. So, you know, quite a while back here on the channel, I played a load of the Half-Life games. It was probably actually a couple of years ago now, at least, when I played Half-Life 1 here on the channel. Because the thing about Half-Life as a franchise is, it's obviously a classic, especially Half-Life 1 in particular. And, you know, I've talked about before here on City Being Hunted, you know, how when I was a kid, obviously, you know, I didn't come from obviously a poor family. No, we were well off enough, but you know, we didn't have all the money in the world to spend on, you know, video games, things like that back in the day, in sort of like the 90s, then through my teenage years and the kind of early 2000s and all that. But the thing is, obviously, I only really played the Half-Life franchise for the first time as an adult because I never got the chance to play it back in the day when I was a kid. Because the thing is, I think, from what I remember correctly, if I remember correctly, that is, back in the day, you know, a lot of games, they weren't so much graphics intensive as they were processor intensive. So obviously, if you wanted to be able to run high-end games back in the day, you needed computers with good processors, whereas these days you need like good graphics cards, things like that. And you know, coming from a family that was, you know, comfortable enough, but not necessarily had all the money in the world, we, you know, our computers that we often had were just sort of budget, you know, office PCs for doing work on and, you know, playing the odd game, things like that. But of course, they couldn't run every game in the world, especially not ones that were quite processor intensive or whatever. So naturally, like I say, the original Half-Life games kind of passed me by. But so I played them obviously for the first time only in recent years as an adult, and I was kind of curious. I just wanted to talk about them because obviously, you know, the Half-Life games are quite a standout franchise, and you know, the most recent edition, of course, is Half-Life Alyx, the VR title, which sadly you do need VR in order to play, which is a shame because I would love to see a version of it where you don't need VR, because I would love to play that because apparently it's a very good game. But the thing is, obviously, like, Half-Life is one of those franchises which you can understand why it was as popular. Well, it is as popular as it is, because it's one of those franchises that has a lot of lore to it. Because, you know, you always get kind of franchises which go really big because they have such an amazing kind of lore to them. People get really into it. So, you know, things like, well, it's one of the reasons, for example, like why franchises like Five Nights at Freddy's did so well, for instance, because the amount of lore and just speculation surrounding them, it kind of encouraged the development of a whole community of theorists and fans making, well, putting forward ideas for in terms of what they think the storyline of the franchise actually is, in terms of what's going on, the backstory, stuff like that. And Half-Life, you know, has plenty of lore to it, obviously with, you know, like the Resonance Cascade in Half-Life 1, Zen, the Neolanthe, and then obviously you get to Half-Life 2, the introduction of the Combine, and all that, and like the idea of a dystopian future Earth that's ruled by an alien power. Oh, you guys get over there. And so, I was actually on YouTube recently, and I discovered a channel. Now, I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation, but it's something like Skyrion, something like that it's called. It's basically Skyrion, I think is how it's spelled. But Skyrion does a lot of videos, not just Half-Life, but also like Portal, for instance, TF2. A lot of basically Valve games, by the looks of it. Just talking about the lore and aspects of those franchises. And last night, the day before I record this, I actually discovered his channel, and really just sat down and watched quite a few of his Half-Life lore videos, and they were really interesting. Especially the ones that talk about the old Half-Life 2 beta, back before the retail release of the game, when it was in obviously an earlier form, because games always go through alpha, beta forms before eventually the devs polish them up into the final form that then gets released onto the market. And what was fascinating looking at the Half-Life 2 beta is just how sort of dark and gritty Half-Life 2 was originally planned to be. I mean, the thing is, don't get me wrong, the Half-Life games are dark to begin with when you think about what actually happens in them. So, Half-Life 1, for example, is all about how a scientific experiment creates a massive series of rifts across the Earth, which allows through alien forces that basically ravage the planet. Then Half-Life 2, of course, is about a future where Earth is dominated by the Combine, by this really sinister alien government force that essentially is just fucking over humanity in all kinds of horrible ways, and which conducts, basically the fusion of the human with the alien to create these quite horrible instruments of war and stuff like that. So, the Half-Life franchise is already pretty dark, don't get me wrong, but when you look at the visuals, obviously, of the Half-Life 2 retail release, thing is, it's gritty and grungy, but when you look at the Half-Life 2 beta, at some of the concepts and designs for things that were going to be originally in Half-Life 2, you realise there was a lot of cut content from the game. And you realise that at one point during its planning process, Half-Life 2 was going to be a lot grittier and darker, even darker than it already is. And I was kind of fascinated watching these Skyrion videos. I just thought I would have loved to see the Half-Life 2 beta, because it just looks so almost like, no, not quite horror, but almost like it has a bit more of a dystopian, something bordering on a dystopian horror vibe to it, which, the Half-Life 2 retail release does have elements of that, but the Half-Life 2 beta suggests that those elements were going to be really played up in the earliest versions of the game. And so I was watching some of the videos that Skyrim released, and some of the concepts that the devs of Half-Life 2 had in mind for things that they might implement in the game, which is really fascinating. Sorry if you can hear me adjusting my microphone. So, for example, there were different enemy types. So everyone knows of the Stalkers in Half-Life 2, those weird, emaciated people who've been transformed basically into emaciated husks of themselves and basically act as the Combine workforce. But there were original designs for them which were just so much more, almost clearly kind of horror. No, that's not the word I'm looking for, really, because the Stalkers are already pretty horrifying in Half-Life 2, but if you look at original designs of what they look like, they look even worse. They look even sort of more sinister, to put it that way, if that's possible. And then there's other types of enemies that they were thinking of implementing, like these ones called the Cremators, who are these weird, cloaked, masked soldier dudes, armed with these kind of not flamethrowers, but kind of similar, but acid throwing weapons and things like this. It's just fascinating to see kind of how things came along with Half-Life 2 and just some of the original ideas that were behind it. And so, I think I've talked before here on my channel, perhaps in my Surrey Being Hunted series, about sometimes I just find it really fascinating to look at old sort of beta designs and concepts from games. So I've talked before about, for example, cut content, I think, from the Rayman games, particularly Rayman 3, because of course Rayman 3 is my favourite Rayman game, and it's a game that I remember very fondly from my youth. And apparently there was a lot of cut content from that, in terms of what Ubisoft wanted to implement in that game. Oh, hello, Mr. Rabbit. Did you hear about Rayman 3 and suddenly become very interested in hearing what I had to say? Just came over oh, I want to hear about Rayman 3. So yeah, Rayman 3 obviously had a load of cut content, so did Rayman 2. What are you doing there, bud? Wow, you're the most docile, tamest rabbit I think I've ever come across in this game, aren't you just? Yes, but, so, the Rayman games, they obviously had a load of cut content to them. Then, I've talked about, obviously, the beta content of the old Danganronpa games. If you look at, for example, at beta character designs in that, some of them are really fascinating. So the Half-Life 2 beta is another really, really interesting example of something that was just kind of fascinating to delve into and just see some of like the old ideas and enemies and things that were going to be implemented at one stage in that game, but which unfortunately never came to pass. So I'm kind of curious then, in terms of just maybe watching some more Skyrim content on YouTube, and maybe, I don't know, seeing if, for example, what sort of stuff he has about Portal, for instance. Because we know that Portal and Half-Life, I'm pretty sure, are confirmed to be taking place in the same universe. They are in the same continuum. So the events of the Portal games are happening in the same timeline as the events of the Half-Life games. I'm pretty sure that is the case, is it not? I'm pretty sure Aperture Science is meant to exist in the Half-Life universe and all that, so yeah. There's stuff right there, which is always quite interesting. I'm just going to direct them two over there. Send them off in that direction. But God, yeah, I need to watch more of his content. He's got some good stuff. It reminds me as well, there was another channel I can't remember the name of now. I think actually no, I can remember the name. It's Jethild or Jethild. I don't know how you pronounce it. There's another dude who does like lore videos, but this time on Command and Conquer games, especially like Command and Conquer Generals, which is one of my favourite Command and Conquer games of all time. So yeah, that's another channel if you're interested that does a lot of like lore videos. And I was amazed actually how much lore there actually is behind Command and Conquer Generals, because you know, Generals is the one sub-franchise within Command and Conquer which only ever had, you know, the one game and expansion pack to it. Whereas obviously all the other franchises, you know, the Tiberian franchise, the Red Alert franchise, they have multiple installments in them. And so, you know, they have a lot more by way of lore, you would have thought. But Generals has its fair share as well. So that's another interesting channel if you're, you know, up for it. I don't think he's done any lore videos on the Red Alert franchise, but he has done ones on Generals and on the Tiberium franchises within Command and Conquer. So interesting stuff there. But yeah, the main subject that I just wanted to talk about was Skyrim and the Half-Life lore videos. They're really, really interesting stuff. Quite fascinating to watch, just for getting a sense of not just the lore about stuff that made it into the retail release, but also lore about the beta of Half-Life 2 and all that. I watched a fascinating video, just, you know, sorry, digressing again here, but here's like a great video about, you know, the villain of Half-Life 2, Wallace Breen, for instance. Because Breen's quite an interesting character. He's one who, I think on the face of it, you know, you think he's just a sort of cut-and-paste villain for Half-Life 2, but the more you think about kind of the backstory of him, the more you realise that he has got a bit more nuance to his character, which is really, really interesting, because everyone loves a good nuanced villain. In any game or in any entertainment medium, to be honest. Alright, yeah. Okay, well, you know what? I think I'm just going to wrap this video up here, because I've waffled on. Essentially, consider this video, this episode, just one big channel recommendation, essentially, ladies and gents. Where's that dog coming from? It's over there. Okay, hold on. Nope. Turn that off. There we go. Oh, God, he's coming over here. Stop coming towards me. Oh, yeah! Okay, never mind. It was going in exactly the wrong direction, that one. Well, we can basically just pause here, because we're going to wrap the video up anyway. So yeah, Facebook and Twitter links down below, along with a link to my Propagandist channel for anyone interested. If you enjoyed, of course, the like is always appreciated. Incidentally, a Propagandist channel for anyone who's interested. By the time this video goes out, I will be reacting to Ruby Volume 9. That will have started, because obviously it's airing right now on Crunchyroll Premium. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. Yeah, but other than that, I'm going to sign off now. Goodbye, everybody. Right, we've got to check out the stars at night. We've got to check out the pub. Barkeep, hit me up with your finest cider. You see, this is the kind of village that probably every English person ultimately aspires to live in. Which they probably never will do, because fuck me, houses in these kind of villages are fucking expensive. But yes. Let's go to the pub. Is there anyone at the pub? Need cider. Oh, closed until further notice. We've got the flu. Please try the 7th Whistler. We'll be back in business as soon as we're at Mount George and Helen Gables. Oh no, I can't go in. Aha, fuck you, George and Helen Gables. I'm in your pub. It's technically closed. Oh. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna fucking just, you know, stick my lips around the bottom of that beer tap and just empty it all into my mouth.